You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 23rd of July, 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
Regardless who the American people choose as their next president, Israel remains America's indispensable and strong ally in the Middle East.
Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in Washington, where he'll be addressing a joint session of Congress and meeting with the president. Could this be a reset for the fractious relationship between Israel and the US? Then we sit down with Hawaii Governor Josh Green to talk about the road ahead for the Democrats.
Do they want Donald Trump and go back in time? Or do they want to just go forward with a younger ticket? It really will look like that.
Then, as thousands of athletes and millions of spectators descend on Paris for the Olympic Games, what are the security concerns and how do authorities plan to keep all involved safe? There's been a minor breakthrough in the tussle for the South China Sea. We'll explore a new agreement between Beijing and Manila over the second Thomas Shoal. We'll have a look through the papers and a roundup of culture news, and we'll explore the Open House Festival in London, opening the doors of some of the city's best buildings to the public. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. US Vice President Kamala Harris has unofficially secured support from a majority of delegates to the Democratic National Convention to ensure she'll become the party's nominee for president. Russian media reports that the country's forces are conducting drills involving Yars mobile nuclear missile launchers in what will be the second such exercise in less than a month. And the US Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatles rebuffed bipartisan calls to resign for security failures that allowed a would-be assassin to wound Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and rankled lawmakers by refusing to provide details about the incident. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrived in Washington last night. He plans to meet with President Joe Biden and his Vice President Kamala Harris and will address Congress at the invitation of the Republicans on Wednesday. Well, I'm joined now by Hannah McCarthy, a journalist in Jerusalem. Hannah, many thanks for coming back on the show. Now, we know that Netanyahu's addressed Congress more often than any other leader. I think this would be his fourth time. And just before looking at what this latest address might be, I was interested to look back at his past two visits, because in 2015, he used his speech to attack the nuclear deal with Iran. Of course, that was Obama's hallmark foreign policy initiative. And in 2020, he then used that to announce the Abraham Accords when Donald Trump was in power. So since then, Bibi, of course, has lost and regained power. He's now at the helm of the most right-wing coalition in Israeli history. I wonder what those last two visits tell us about where Bibi's political loyalty may lie.
Well, it's clear that his loyalties are much closer to the Republican Party than the Democratic Party. The Obama administration was furious over his address in 2015 and the public criticism of their nuclear deal. And one of the advisors who was closely involved in that did have a meeting with Netanyahu's administration in advance of this speech to confirm what are expected to be the key points. And again, the Biden's administration has made it clear that they expect a different tone to be set in his speech this time at Congress, and that they will not look kindly on a tone similar to that of 2015, where there's outright condemnation.
Netanyahu seems to have slipped in Donald Trump's estimation. Will there be a meeting with him?
This has not yet been confirmed, but certainly, if we look at Netanyahu as a political operator, he will certainly be eyeing up how does he balance out the possibility of a Trump presidency while also managing a relationship with Kamala Harris. And again, we know that Trump was very critical of Netanyahu for publicly congratulating Biden on winning the presidency in 2020, and he has not shied away from saying that publicly. And now Netanyahu is in a position where he basically is going to have to publicly thank Biden before Congress. So it's a very delicate situation for Netanyahu, and it's hard to see if he's going to keep everyone happy.
Well, exactly. There are so many constituents, both at home and abroad, to appease. There's his American backers, his right-wing cabinet, those Israelis who want an end to the war. How is he going to try and tread that line? What will be the key message?
Well, we understand that a significant portion of his address is going to talk about the atrocities of the 7th of October. He's also going to talk about the hostages. Some of the hostage families are part of his official delegation, but also some of the hostage families are protesting his visit. He's also expected to talk about, why Israel should be pursuing a strategy of total victory in Gaza. And also talking about Iran's role in the regional security issues. So again, there is the administration has said they expect at some point, maybe not in his address, but at least in meetings with the US administration, to put forward an idea for the day after in Gaza. And if he doesn't deliver some concrete ideas on how both the hostage deal and the humanitarian situation in Gaza will move forward, I expect he will receive a quite cold reception at the White House.
I wonder if domestic interests are at heart for all participants. I mean, the invitation for Netanyahu to address this meeting was orchestrated by the House of Representatives' Republican leadership. Netanyahu, too, is obviously desperately trying to cling on to power.
Sure. So the address is also, it will air at prime time in Israel around 9 p.m. So it's basically a kind of way also of showing that Netanyahu is still a powerful, influential figure on the international scene. I was talking to an analyst yesterday who said that, whether you like him or not, Netanyahu is an incredibly smart and able politician. He is, the leader of a very small, not particularly, influential country, but yet he is, speaking at Congress for the fourth time. He is someone who is able to, stand shoulder to shoulder with many of the major leaders of the world. And that is a political coup. Israelis like to see a show of strength. They like to see that they are being respected abroad. And, this will serve that, at least in some respects.
Of course, the Middle East conflict seems to be growing and expanding now into Yemen and Lebanon. I wonder what Netanyahu hopes to gain from the US in terms of the widening conflict.
Well, certainly the previous position in relation to Yemen was that, the US in particular should be taking a more active stance in protecting the Red Sea shipping routes. And again, they felt that the US should be stepping up there more rather than Israel. So again, there'll be some discussions there around how security is going to be delivered there. Israel obviously took the decision to respond to the drone attack on Tel Aviv, where one person was killed by targeting a port in Yemen, and where several people died. And again, there is concerns about how Israel is going to manage resources if the northern front with Lebanon escalates. And certainly these are all factors that are going to be discussed with the US administration. There will be defense officials probing him on how he actually thinks this plan will be delivered. What is the actual end goal of the military strategy in both Lebanon and Gaza?
And will there be scaremongering about Iran?
I mean, Netanyahu will definitely. Iran is a talking point that Netanyahu will bring up in any security discussion, and it is also something that the US is genuinely concerned about. So there will be some close discussions on that. And again, it'll be just interesting to see how he talks about Iran in the speech as well.
And do you think that Republicans, who are, of course, eager to twist the knife into an already beleaguered Biden, will embrace Netanyahu and his defiant position on the war?
It's hard to see exactly how this will play out until we see in Congress. Certainly some Democrats plan on boycotting this speech, but I would expect that some of the Republicans would highlight almost that as saying that they're not standing with Israel. I think in general, the Republicans will want to emphasize that they are standing with Israel, that they are friends of Israel. A significant portion of Republicans are, for example, Christian Zionists. who have a very strong relationship and view towards Israel. So they'll be seeking to emphasize that. But there also, I think, will be efforts made by Republicans to meet with the hostage families as well, who may both be protesting Netanyahu and coming as part of his official delegation.
And there'll be lots of protests outside, I expect, too.
There will be many different protests there. We know that some Jewish American groups are protesting. There are some Israeli groups protesting, and there's also some pro-Palestinian anti-war protests. So it's going to be, I think, a diverse range of protests happening, and it will be a difficult PR environment for Netanyahu.
How will a change in the US president affect Israel?
Well, we know Biden has always talked about, how he identifies as a Zionist. He has a long and personal relationship with Israel. Because of his age, he's someone who grew up very much in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Kamala Harris does not seem to be someone who's going to, depart from his foreign policy radically. However, she is of a younger generation that has a slightly different view of Israel. They see it more as a military superpower. And she has used language that is more critical of Israel in terms of not doing enough for the humanitarian situation in Gaza. So we would accept maybe, and she is also closer to the progressive wing in the Democratic Party. So we would expect her to maybe talk a little bit more about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, but we're not necessarily expecting some radical departure in how foreign policy will be conducted. And indeed, Biden will be likely leading foreign policy for the next 6 months while Kamala Harris is taking to the campaign trail.
This is, of course, assuming she wins. If she doesn't?
And Kamala, for the next 6 months, while Kamala Harris is campaigning, she will probably not be taking a lead in foreign policy role. And obviously, if Trump secures the presidency in November, Biden will have a few more months where he will be in power. So we would expect him to be the central point while the ceasefire deal is negotiated. Again, if Trump takes over, we know that Netanyahu and the Israeli right favors a Trump presidency. At the same time, he's not the most reliable partner. He's prone to change policies on a whim. And he's talked about a more transactional approach to foreign aid, which is not something that Israel will find reassuring. And again, he's also had no problem with publicly criticizing Netanyahu for what he says was his failures on the 7th of October and for congratulating Biden on winning the election in 2020. So it's likely to be some unstable months ahead, I would say, for Israel while they watch what happens in the US.
Hannah, thank you very much indeed. That's Hannah McCarthy there, and this is The Globalist. The dramatic end to US President Joe Biden's bid for a second term in office has left many Democrats wondering whether the party has enough time to regroup and field a strong enough campaign for November's election. Governor Josh Green of Hawaii sits in a deep blue state and is a family friend of the Bidens. He spoke to Monocle's US editor Christopher Lord about the president's decision to leave and the road ahead.
The debate, as it was bad. And the president had, a devastating moment. He was ill. I am a physician. I'm very close to the man. He was not at his best. He would have been better if he had other opportunities to debate Trump. Trump was not good at all that day. It just was overshadowed by President Biden's performance. The party will come together. Kamala presents a very unique challenge for the Republicans. She's 20 years younger than Mr. Trump. She will run circles around him, in my opinion, as far as the issues go. And I hope that she gets to really go at him in any number of debates. I right now would love to see several debates. And I will bet you a buck that Trump runs like a chicken from debating her, because she has that prosecutorial capacity, and he should be prosecuted for what he's done to women, as far as I'm concerned, and their reproductive rights and so on. So this sets up a really interesting dynamic. I believe the vice president will choose an exceptional vice president to run with her, a vice presidential nominee. Very likely someone that can help us carry part of the Midwest or a swing state or two. So we're going to be a vibrant ticket. And at the end of the day, if you really want to know what I think is going to happen, I think the 65 million women of reproductive age are going to have to make up their minds Do they want Donald Trump and go back in time, give up their contraceptive rights and their abortion rights, or do they want to just go forward with a younger ticket? It really will look like that. Whether the Trump people can throw enough mud at Kamala and the VP, maybe that'll carry the day. But I think that Donald Trump's real ceiling, once we regress to norm, is 45%. And I think our real floor is 46%. But you still have to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So, I got a dear friend over there in Josh Shapiro. He might be the choice. Gretchen Whitmer is terrific. It's unlikely to have both of our nominees be women, but women are great and should lead, half the time. So that's important too. And there are other names. I would not be surprised if the governor of North Carolina, Cooper, who Kamala knows very well from her attorney general days, all of those people, and there are plenty more, would be great additions to the ticket. Our ticket's going to be more vibrant and women are going to like us more. As to whether or not we win the election, I have my thoughts, but we'll see.
You're hearing that from the donors, Governor Green. There was a moment when some donors did sort of waver a little bit and hover about that. You're hearing a change of pace.
I am. Big donors are back on board. And honestly, small grassroots donations are going through the roof. I even made a $50 donation this morning just to join in the fun. Normally I raise big dollars as a governor, but Kamala's probably going to raise $500 million for the ticket over the course of the next, say, 6 weeks. I would not be surprised through small donations. And then the rest of us will do our part. It's not going to be about money. This is going to be about whether or not people really want to go back to the past, or they want to take a, kind of a move and a step toward a future for a younger candidate. The Republicans are going to attack Kamala on border security and immigration. But, they had a chance. In fact, they had 50 chances to pass legislation, and they refused to do it. So if Americans are cognizant of what really happened, they will know that there was an impasse created by the Republican majority in the House. So that's nonsense. So then it's going to be a personality question, and we'll see whether people want to go for the bombastic Donald Trump or the litigator and vice presidential demeanor of Kamala Harris. I like her chances. And when I say her chances, I mean our chances, because I think of her as family already.
Governor Green, very finally, before I let you go, I just want to ask you one thing, because I know you've worked very closely with President Biden when the tragedy happened on Maui with the wildfires. Just paint a picture a little bit, if you could, for those listening. We've got listeners all over the world. Just why this president has been important for you in your mind, and if you like, a little bit about the legacy of him. And really, I guess, there have been questions raised in recent weeks about people dealing with him in the last few months. And I just wonder your own reflections of talking to him in recent months and maybe sort of slightly setting the record straight on his presidency. President
Biden, who is dear to our family, he was actually the roommate of my wife's uncle back when they were in college for 4 years. They were roommates. Surreal. I was a little kid, right? During then, didn't even know my wife yet. So he's been dear to our family all these years. When the wildfire occurred just about a year ago, on August 8th, within 6 hours, he accepted our ask for a major disaster declaration. 6 hours. That is not something that someone who is out of sorts can do. It was amazing. He then came and walked the street of Lahaina, Front Street, with the First Lady, Jamie, myself, and Dr. Jill Biden, the FEMA secretary, or FEMA director. We walked that tragic fire zone. We then went to a town hall meeting where he embraced 300 people who had just lost everything. In some cases, lost their loved ones. And ever since, for the last 11 months, he has been communicating with me directly. He's been assigning his cabinet to help us through the tragedy and help us heal. He made sure we had billions of dollars to recover. This is a great gentleman and someone who served with dignity and cared for the state of Hawaii, which, by the way, is a place that many people view as kind of a symbolic part of their lives. I had every version of Democrat, Republican, Independent, governors, congresspeople call me and say how important Hawaii is to them. And the president shared with me that Dan Inouye, our legendary senator, helped him through his tragedy when he lost his wife and daughter. And now he wanted to help Hawaii when we lost so much. This is a a gentleman who really was dignified in his service. And that was special. So I was utterly unwilling to throw him under the bus when everyone else was saying he's too old. This is a guy who helped us heal. And that's what he should be remembered for from this perspective of Hawaii. I will be forever grateful to him for his leadership. And if he says Kamala's our person, and I like her too personally, then she's our person. And we owe it to him to honor that legacy, and she will help carry that legacy with her experience and vision. So President Biden was extraordinary. It is a very real question to ask whether or not someone should be running for president after they're 75. Okay, we asked that of our dear President Biden. I hope the world will ask that of the former president, Donald Trump now. What's fair is fair. That son of a gun is old and not focused. So President Biden helped our state immensely, and I'm going to try to help him with the legacy, which is now Vice President Harris becoming president.
Governor Josh Green of Hawaii in conversation with Monocle's US editor, Christopher Lord. Still to come on the programme.
Get ready for incredible Olympic Games Paris 2024. Action starts on Friday, July 26th.
With only a few days to go before the Olympic Games begin in Paris, we'll look at the efforts to keep the French capital safe during this global event.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Well, let's continue now with today's newspapers. And joining me down the line is Navina Kaur, Monocle's Nairobi correspondent. Navina, we spoke yesterday. You were in Paris. What's the atmosphere like there?
I have to say, I left Paris yesterday, but as I was leaving, there were several teams arriving. I saw Team India, the Team Philippines, and also teams from Germany arriving by train at Gare de l'Est in Paris. And I think there is a high security presence. I think it's something you're going to be talking about later. There is also some concern among Paris residents about the access people will have to areas where the games will be taking place. Apparently, you need a QR code. It's very difficult for people to enter on anything other than by foot. And from what I was hearing, there's also a bit concern about people being detained for 3 months while these games and the Paralympic Games are happening.
So, I mean, as you say, there's an awful lot to unpick there, and we'll be doing some of that a little bit later in the programme. Now, when we spoke to you yesterday, you brought us up to date on the protests in Kenya, and it looks like they're still continuing.
Yes, they're still continuing. The protesters are planning to occupy or to at least block the major international airport in the country, Jomo Kenyatta Airport. The whole day has been dubbed Occupy JKIA in order to put more pressure on William Ruto. At the same time, we're expecting Parliament to be back and vet the cabinet nominees that the president has put forward. There are some interesting cartoons in the newspapers showing parliamentarians kind of barricaded behind barbed wire, trying to kind of stay safe from the protesters. You know, we have to remember that the protesters managed to storm Parliament a couple of weeks ago. So I think this is a major story in the country, and it's not going away.
And it seems to be spreading across the border too, because Uganda's deployed its army and police as Gen Z there also is up in arms.
Exactly. Apparently, there was a very heavy police presence deployed around Kampala in order to basically forestall planned protests today in Kampala. From what I understand, it wasn't just in Kampala, but also outside the country on major highways. The main opposition leader, Bobi Wine, is saying that security forces have basically besieged the headquarters of his party, and we are expecting proper protests to take place today.
I found what the president, Yoweri Museveni, had to say quite extraordinary. He said on television, he said, "We are busy producing wealth, and you here want to disturb us. You're playing with fire because we cannot allow you to disturb us." Producing wealth for whom, I think, is the question.
Yes, I think that is the question many of the protesters have. I think it's very similar to the questions that people in Kenya are asking. I think the allegations against Yoweri Museveni, his son, his family, but also the military are far more serious. They're seen to be extracting not just from their people and donors, but also extracting wealth from neighboring countries. So I think we have to see how big these protests become in Kampala. They're certainly not, this is certainly not something we see on a daily basis, but as you say, it seems to have spread it, or people seem to have taken inspiration for what has been happening in Kenya for weeks.
Now, of course, we know that one of the ways that governments react to big movements like this is to shut down the internet. And Elon Musk owns Starlink, which is a huge satellite broadband service and has a presence over Africa. But there's some issues with it.
Exactly. Starlink has been sort of facing regulatory obstacles in Africa that observers are saying are due to the fact that governments want a certain amount of control over when they can turn off the internet. We saw this in Kenya, as you said, on the day protesters stormed the parliament, the internet was seemingly turned off. We never had an official explanation for this, but the internet speed definitely dropped off. It was difficult to communicate. That was the case for about 12 hours. And it looks like the company has run into problems in Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, in the Congo, South Africa and Senegal. I think in some of these countries it is down to sort of local legal regulations that a telecoms company needs to have local ownership, and Elon Musk doesn't meet these criteria. In other places, it's also down to the fact that governments feel they need to be able to tax Starlink, and again, that is not possible. So from what I understand, there are now different attempts at basically striking deals with one-to-one with African governments in order to grant access to the market.
And one country they've actually struck a deal with is Zimbabwe, but it's very, very controversial because it's gone to a friend of the president.
Exactly. I think that's very, very controversial. It went to a friend of the president called Wicknell Chivayo, who basically now has an exclusive partnership with Starlink. I think there was a similar agreement reached in Kenya with where a 30% local ownership requirement was waived, but in return, Starlink had to provide high-speed internet in rural areas. I think we have to see how these links are made. It's obviously very attractive because it's very fast. You don't need any infrastructure, but the question how successful the company will be, I think, is not clear yet, at least on the continent.
Now, it's very rare that mainstream publications actually have cacti in the headlines, but in fact, we are talking about the illegal succulent plant trade, and that's a big story in the Mail and Guardian.
Yes, it's a massive issue in the Western Cape. Apparently also in the Northern Cape, there has been a massive spike in what is described as succulent poaching. That's illegal succulent plant trade of plants that are endemic to the Western Cape, are quite rare and take a very long time, in some cases decades, to grow. And from what we understand from Cape Nature, these plants are being sold to East Africa. A lot of them are red listed. They're being sold to not to East Africa, to East Asia. And there has been a massive spike in poaching incidents.
And what are they used for? I mean, are these the little cactuses people buy to have on their desk, or is it medicinal, or what's the purpose?
I think in cases from cases in the Northern Cape, we know that these are plants that people then grow at home that have sort of value because they're aesthetics and because they're quite rare, and that's why it's possible that if you have low income or if you're unemployed, to make a decent amount of money if you basically grab these plants and sell them to people who are selling them off illegally to East Asia.
There are reports that in the past 4 years, 1.2 million wild harvested plants were seized. Around 650 species were found. So I think this is an issue that the authorities are going to look into over the next couple of months.
Navina, thank you very much indeed. That's Navina Couture there. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. US Vice President Kamala Harris has unofficially secured support from a majority of delegates to the Democratic National Convention to ensure she will become the party's nominee for president. In 24 hours, she's raised $81 million in donations, almost a month's worth of funding. Russian media reports that the country's forces are conducting drills involving Yar's mobile nuclear missile launchers in what will be the second such exercise in less than a month. Russia's Kommersant newspaper reported today that the systems, equipped with a missile with multiple warheads, can hit targets at a distance of 11,000 kilometres. And US Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheetle rebuffed bipartisan calls to resign for security failures that allowed a would-be assassin to wound Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and rankled lawmakers by refusing to provide details about the incident. So far, she's refused to stand down and, although she called the shooting the most significant operational failure at the Secret Service in decades, she said she's also the best person to lead the service at this time. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Paris has begun a huge security operation in preparation for the opening of the Olympic Games. The city is expecting 10,500 athletes and millions of spectators. France now has a Games force of up to 45,000 police and gendarmes who are backed up by a 10,000-strong contingent of soldiers. They're based in the largest military camp in Paris since World War II. France is also receiving aid from more than 40 countries that together have sent at least 1,900 police reinforcements. That's a lot of numbers to get to grips with. Dr. Sally Leavesley is here to help us. She's Managing Director of New Risk Limited and advises companies and governments on terrorism. Sally, why does this iteration of the Games present a particular security challenge?
Well, every Games always has a problem. France has particular problems, mainly because it's at a time of rising conflict, and the sports activity can provide an opportunity for nations hostile to France to try and disrupt the Games, and particularly the opening ceremony will be the most significant, because if France cannot be shown to secure the Games and secure its population, it creates a distrust between the public and the government. So there are wider conflict issues which really are interfering with these Games.
And in terms of the opening ceremony, that's also because it's due to take place on the Seine. It's not within any kind of contained building. And indeed, many of the events have the same problem.
Yes, but if we've been looking at French television lately, we'll see that already is a sterilised area. It actually is barricaded off. There are a limited number of ticketed people, and the French intelligence services, obviously helped by international countries, have weeded out some thousands of people who may have tried to enter into those ticketed areas. Inside the ticketed areas of the opening ceremony and all of the other events may actually be safer than the peripheral areas outside if you push criminals and terrorists out of internal activities. The thing for people to watch is for activities outside, when they're shopping, when they're in cafes, when they're travelling to the Olympics.
Is there a cyber element to the risks?
There's a very significant cyber element, and unfortunately for the French, this started a whole year ago, and the intelligence reports that have been coming out since 2023 have shown a very direct and malevolent effort, unfortunately by Russia, towards the Olympics. And this is very important for people to understand, because the way in which the social media is being interfered with and it's AI assisted, so it's very influential, put into language, AI generated language, and also translated into home languages of people who are visiting. So when people are there, they may go to social media if something is happening, and that social media may create panic within people. So listening to the French broadcast and their home country's broadcast media will be much safer, because an attempt to panic people and create fear and send them home or even stop them going to the games, that has been going on for a whole year.
Do you think that communications will be disrupted?
Communications are always a fair target for malevolent actors, unfortunately. And also, coincidentally, it's also energy systems trying to turn off power to systems as well. But with broadcasting in particular, and also the games events, the internal servers operating the games, those will be heavily secured, not only by France, but remember the other participating countries. For many years, they have been working with France to help secure these systems. So there'll be massive assistance to France if there is any attempt at public communications. But again, for the general public who are visiting, do realise that if a terrorist attack happens, everyone gets onto their phone. And it means that text messages may be your easiest way to try and get messages through. And don't depend on communications, and don't get panicked if communications aren't open, but just have a plan when you leave your hotel or your place to go to the games. Have a plan about where you're going to go if there is an event. And don't worry if messages take a while to get through.
My last guest was saying that there's quite a lot of discontentment amongst residents in Paris. It's very difficult for them to access places that they live or work, and also that people are being detained for up to 3 months to keep them off the streets during this time.
Well, there are two things. There's been a massive intelligence operation and a damping down of potential disruptive people. So the French police have heavily gone into known activists. They've looked at their computers. They've tried to ensure that these people will never get near the game. So they'll be under heavy surveillance. But as we know, it's people who are travelling into France from other countries, particularly countries that might be hostile, and unknown single activists that will be the problem. In the same way that we see terrorist events in normal times. But unfortunately, because of hybrid warfare, where we get this communications attempts at disruption, trying to put panic into people, and also arming terrorists with much bigger weapons and much more effective weapons and information. So terrorists may not be terrorists. They may be actors for states.
Sally, I fear that we're doing the same thing and alarming listeners about how dangerous it's going to be. But actually, it is a wonderful celebration of France, of athleticism. What safety advice, then, would you give to people planning to attend the Games?
Well, any games or any public event, the biggest problem is anything sitting in your back pocket that may be lifted, or your credit cards. And all Olympics, it's criminal fraud, financial fraud, which is the biggest worry generally for any visitors. Crowds are always a problem. With natural accidents, but also terrorist events, crowds can become very dangerous, particularly for families with little children in strollers. The best way is always to understand whether you're in a street cafe or in a shop or walking down a street or in an event, where is your exit? Can you be, if you've got a family, can you be closer in a less crowded area? If you have to run away quickly, you don't go with the crowd. You try and get into less crowded areas and make your way back to a safe home place. So people, in the same way as they might go to football games naturally with their families, you have the same protective ideas. But do realise that your social media, because everyone goes to their phone, your social media information may not be correct. And I think, apart from that, enjoy it. What you do know is that for many years, the French government has been securing, with massive security, this situation. When we look back at France, I have admired the French medical response. I haven't seen one as good around the world. When thousands of people were affected in 2015, the official medical analysis that came out afterwards showed that their capacity to get people to hospitals, to open up operating theatres, their staff performed miraculously well. So the behind-the-scenes police, ambulance and medical services in France are second to none. So you're going into a very protected place. And if you're in a venue and you're ticketed, you know that everyone around you has been screened. So you're a lot safer than probably in your home country football game.
Sally, thank you very much indeed. That's Sally Leasley there, and this is Monocle Radio. It's 14:39 in Manila, 7:39 here in London. Now, China claims nearly all of the South China Sea, conflicting with maritime claims of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia and Brunei. This has caused tensions in the region for many years, but on Sunday there was a small and probably temporary breakthrough between China and the Philippines over the latter's claim on the second Thomas Shoal. Well, I'm joined now by Alessia Patalana, who's a professor at King's College London and an expert on Asian defence. Alessia, it's lovely to have you back with us. I wonder if you could explain the background to the dispute over the second Thomas Shoal.
Good morning, Georgina. So that's an excellent point to start this conversation because, as you were saying earlier, but the problem is that the way China articulates its claims in the South China Sea equal roughly to more than 90% of the surface in the area, and in particular around the second Thomas Shoal. There's two elements that contributed to antagonize the dispute over the boundary delimitation and the ownership of some of the reefs and shores and islands in the area with the Philippines. The first, in 1999, the Philippines, like many countries in the South China Sea with claims, have started to position, if you want, markers to make sure that its claims would be more easily, if you want, supported. And that was by anchoring on one of these shores, or on one of the shores, and second Thomas Shoals, as a matter of fact, this old World War II vintage ship, the Sierra Madre, which kept since then. And created tensions with China, but it was also in response of a number of actions taken by China, not least in Mischief Reef. Now, the second element of this story, so there's a physical, if you want, creating markers, artificial sort of points to put your foot down, if you want, in terms of the claim itself. The second is this ruling in 2016 by the International Court of Arbitration, which stepped into the situation at the request of the Philippines, even though China did not participate in the proceedings, and it basically cleared the fact that second Thomas Shoals falls within clearly the Filipino exclusive economic zone. Now, the Sierra Madre, as I was saying earlier, is a very, very old ship. It started to fall apart. There's a small group of Filipino Marines on it, and so requires normal resupply. And in the last few months, these resupply activities have been at the center of the beef between the Chinese and the Filipinos.
But now there's an agreement. Tell us about it.
So the agreement, it's unsure whether we have an agreement, actually, because, of course, the things escalating in the past few months, and there was a severe type of tensions. A few weeks back, there was an incident with Filipino Navy personnel that actually got injured quite severely. So tension had raised to a stage that required the two governments to step in and talk to each other in order to de-escalate the situation. Which they did. At the end of this conversation, that seemed to be an agreement yesterday was announced that was sort of emerging, whereby both sides will try to reduce the tension and talk to each other around this resupply mission. However, shortly after this agreement was announced, then you have another situation, and you see the statements both from the Filipino and the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which, however, don't match each other very well. And in fact, if nothing else, you've got the Chinese restating their position, which is, if the Filipino want to approach the Sierra Madre with resupply, they'll be still in a situation whereby the Chinese will have the right to board and inspect these resupplies. So at the moment, we know that there is this deal that is aimed at reducing the tension, but the statements that followed shortly thereafter suggest something very different, and that is we haven't really found a solution to the tension, the situation as it stands.
And just finally, we know that the Philippines and the US are bound by a 1951 mutual defence treaty that can be invoked in case of an armed attack against Philippine forces. Will Washington be involved at all with the resupply missions to the Sierra Madre?
So I think this is one of the reasons why this was escalating, and that's exactly why the two governments talked, and the Chinese very clearly in their own statement referred to the fact that the Filipinos will carry out this resupply by themselves, because there had been indications from the United States government that the resupply would start taking place with US escorts, or indeed they might be even considered by US military assets or Coast Guard assets. So it's going to be interesting to see whether part of this conversation really revolved around the United States and the Filipinos did indeed commit not to have them involved. However, we know from the past few months that the American government has cleared that Second Thomas Shaw falls within the agreements between the United States and the Philippines in a fashion that is not too dissimilar from what in 2014 happened with the Obama administration around the Senkaku Islands. So this story is not ended. This is just a pause on what is a tension that is not going to go away, and we have to see how it evolves over the next few weeks and months.
Alessio, thank you very much indeed. That's Alessio Patalano there, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time now to talk about arts and culture with the arts journalist Emma Rose Abrams, who joins us here in the studio. Many thanks for coming in, Emma.
Good morning.
We are going to start with the story out of Russia, which is extraordinary. Just explain what's happened to these Russian artists.
Well, it's these two artists, a married couple, and they are Anastasia Djurdjeva and her husband Alexander Dotsenko, who was born in the Ukraine. And they've been sentenced to 3.5 years over an anti-war or alleged anti-war supermarket protest, which is similar to one that happened before, where they add information to Ukrainian products. They'll put a sticker on the label. I mean, we have these protests in the UK as well, where people will just replace the label or change some writing on an advertisement and make a kind of play on words on it. But they've been sentenced to 3.5 years for terrorist activities for this.
And what they actually did was they placed napkins with anti-government slogans in supermarkets in the Leningrad region, which is where Putin was born, of course.
Yes, of course. And I think they've been accused of calling for harm to come to Putin. And thus kind of sentenced in this way. And it comes at the same time that the artist Sasha Skotchlenko, who also was sentenced to 7 years, her appeal came up the day before that they were sentenced, and she did a similar thing where she was replacing tags on products, kind of calling to attention that what was happening in Mariupol at the time. And so it's kind of like at the same time as her appeal comes up, this very harsh sentence comes down again. Not quite as harsh as the 7 years that she was given, but again, an incredibly harsh sentence. And these artists have also, I mean, I think Anastasia Djurdjeva had her exhibition raided a couple of years ago, well, at the beginning of the war. And so they're coming under consistent government pressure to stop making the art that they do.
Yeah, well, here in Britain, somebody is also making art that references war, but she's been welcomed.
Yeah, exactly. So here we have Fiona Banner, who is Circa Art have the art project that features in Piccadilly Circus on the big screen there. They're also responsible for the for oh my God. My mind's gone completely.
Well, let's just talk about, because they've captured the contradictory phenomena of military flypasts in
exactly.
this, which is fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating. So Fiona Banner, who makes a lot of work relating to war and commenting on different aspects of wartime, has created this film Flypast, which features every day for the next 3 months at, I think, 8 p.m. in Piccadilly Circus, and it just has the word disarm in a kind of form, a flypast form, and that's kind of to draw attention to the rising amount of conflict that's happening in the world at the moment.
And she says also about our assault on the planet and each other.
Exactly, so it's all about thinking about the universal impact of war.
And finally, let's have a look at the Iowa Museum. It's the first museum in the US to return Benin bronzes.
Exactly. And the key thing about this return of the Benin bronzes is that they return to the Oba of Benin. And this apparently has some controversy to it, because returning these objects to the royal family is different to restituting them to the government, where they would remain in public hands. But the Iowa Stanley Museum thinks that they should be returned to him, and it's up to him whether or not he decides to loan them to anybody else.
Why is it the first US museum to do this? It seems quite remiss that nobody's done it so far.
I think the restitution of the Benin bronzes is so complicated. I think the only country that's restituted en masse 22 items is Germany. But they are now saying that they are slightly anti the restitution because of the government's recognition of the Oba of Benin. They don't want to return it to the royal family. They'd rather return it to the government than private hands.
Thank you very much. That's Emma Rose Abrams there. And you're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, an opportunity to get some advance information on one of Monocle's favourite events, the Open House Festival. The director, Celia Mead, joins me now. Celia, this event is a wonderful way to get people to engage with the built environment and explore places that are usually closed in London. Now, I understand that this year will be the biggest and most ambitious programme to date, featuring 700 free open days across all 33 London boroughs. I wonder if you could tell us a little of the history of this event.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you. Thanks so much. Well, Open House has been going for 31 years. And so we're in the 31st year. I can't guarantee it'll be the biggest yet, but it's looking that way. We have just released a preview of all the applications we've had so far. And that's 673 amazing buildings, events, walks. That's nearly twice where we were this time last year. We have another 100 applications in the pipeline. So I think we'll easily overshoot 700, which is what we did last year, and probably over 800, I think, by the time we get to 14th of September, because the festival runs 14th to the 22nd of September. And analysing all these different places from right across London, every single London borough, we can see that 28% of them haven't been in the festival before. So I'm really super excited about that, because these are new places that people haven't been able to get into and haven't been part of our festival until now.
And so how does it work? Do the buildings themselves, or the people in charge of the buildings, approach you? They apply to be part of the festival?
That's right. And so we have a system, a website, and it's actually not too late if you've got something really fantastic you want to share with people. But what we do is we score against curatorial criteria. So we look to see how much of this building hasn't been open to the public before, how much are they suggesting, what sort of access arrangements might they be making. We look at the learning that they might be providing. Are they providing a workshop or a talk or a tour? Can they open their archives? What's the description like of the building? Does it show why it's special architecturally or design wise, or in terms of the history and heritage and the community value? So we're really looking to provide access to spaces that are not normally open to the public, or that might normally be charged for, because of course we are a free, I should emphasize, we're a free to access festival, and that's really important. It doesn't cost people anything.
So I wonder if you could give us some examples. What are some highlights?
Right, we've got so many, but I have to say that when as a staff team, when we were trying to work out the staff picks list from the 673 that are in the festival so far, we got to 170. so yes, I find this very hard to choose a highlight. So I'm going to describe some of the places that are really very different from one another that are in this year's festival. So for the first time, we've got Murky FCHQ in Croydon. It's a new building. It's at the Selhurst Sports Arena, and it's the headquarters of Murky FC. And it's more than just a football centre, it's also a community hub. So I'm choosing that one. It's a new building, interesting design, but it's also it's got the community value, and we are all about trying to foster a sense of connection, well-being, and a sense of belonging.
And of course, that was created by the rapper Stormzy.
That's right, yes. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I should have said, yes, absolutely. So I think that's an interesting one in Croydon. Then let's have a contrast, perhaps a more heritage one. We've got Sir Howard Hodgkin's studio, which is a converted dairy in Bloomsbury that's opening with his art, obviously, on the walls. So that's an interesting one in Bloomsbury. Then I'm going to choose an event on the Friday night of the festival. Let me just quickly work out, 22nd of September. The National Portrait Gallery are hosting an architecture late, and they'll have all sorts of interesting events. But of course, the building itself has this really interesting adaptation and new public space, which I think is worth visiting. And I know that 2,000 people will be able to attend that architecture late. So it's going to feel really, really interesting, not just because of the building, but because they're running architectural drawing workshops. They've got a DJ, they've got a design challenge, tour of the building, and other events going on for that one. So that's a nice one, obviously, near Trafalgar Square.
Just very quickly before we go, Celia, what are the benefits of getting people to engage with these buildings?
I think obviously people will, we hope that people will enjoy it and maybe learn something. But it's really about that feeling of connection to London. So we say that we are a charity, and we're after achieving social impact. We want people to feel more positive about London, more connected to London. To really revel in that sense of access, that special sense of access, and that really is what we are all about.
Celia, that's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. That's Celia Mead there, who's director of the Open House Festival. That happens in September, and you can find much more information on their website. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Vincent McAviney, Carlotta Rebello and Monica Lillis, our researcher, Sana Jamani, and our studio manager, Christy O'Grady, with editing assistance from Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. I'll be with you throughout the continental shift, playing you some great tracks, and of course there's lots of sharp programming from our colleagues across the company. The briefing will be live at midday in London, and the Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.